Tonight's presentation will be on SAS, the revolution of SAS, and we have the privilege and pleasure to hear from Manish Chowdhury, founder of Ecommerce. So I'll introduce him very briefly and then I'll turn it over to Manish. Manish provides business and technology leadership to Ecommerce and its clients, and he has guided the company to become one of the most admired e-commerce platform providers in the world. He is a recognized expert in his field and a sought-after speaker on topics ranging from e-commerce and online marketing to business leadership and entrepreneurship. He holds a BS in computer engineering from the University of Bridgeport, and he also holds multiple business process patents on collaborative commerce. And just a few weeks ago, he was invited by University of Bridgeport to do their commencement ceremony. So please welcome Manish Chowdhury.
Just by way of quick introduction, Ecommerce is a SaaS e-commerce platform provider, meaning we help retailers sell goods online. And also, by way of definition, there's always a lot of confusion that I find.
Take this away and fix it.
Oh, okay. Sure. Can everybody hear me at the back?
Absolutely.
Okay. Yeah, so by way of definition, I think there's a lot of confusion. I don't want to just put it out there that what is SaaS? You know, SaaS, the SaaS vendor owns the software. You don't own it, and it runs on SaaS vendor's data center, not on your data center. The customer usually will rent it for a monthly fee or an annual fee, as they call the subscription fee. And typically, all the customers that use the software are using the same version of the software. That's kind of the classical definition of SaaS. And what differentiates SaaS from what they call the application service providers, which was anyone who could deliver the software in the cloud. I think most times a lot of people misconstrue anything being delivered on the cloud as a SaaS. And it's on demand, meaning you buy as much as you need, and you don't over-provision, and you pay for what you use.
So that's kind of the classical definition of SaaS, which is different than the traditional software. So I want to talk about SaaS as it comes to e-commerce. That's sort of our area of expertise in terms of software application. So going back in the 80s, there was only store. So on the left-hand side, you see a single channel. The customer would go, buy something, go to the store, and get it. Then came the late 80s or early 90s. Suddenly there were catalogs, the mail order catalogs that you get in the mail. So most companies, what they would do is they would create a separate division and say, that's my catalog business. And they'll have their own 800 number, the post office, the mailing address, and they'll be almost treated as two separate entities within the organization. But customer had more than one channel that they could buy from. So they became multi-channel. And then suddenly somebody figured out that you could buy online and pick it up in store. So in the early 2000s or even mid 2000s, late 2000s, the idea of leveraging your brick and mortar stores along with the digital footprints created what they call omni-channel. But behind the scenes, the software systems, the applications that were supporting this business were all standalone. They just somehow mashed them together, got somehow to connect inventory information back to the website, but behind the scenes, they were all operating as a mishmash web of applications and systems that relied on batch processes, nightly runs, that kind of stuff to make these systems digitized, to give the customer an impression that it's all working using one common application and one common data. But we all know the problems that arise from that is, you place an order, then you walk up, perhaps even within 10 minutes if you walk up to Target and go to the internet pickup station, they will say, oh, we don't see your order yet. Because the lag, it's running every half an hour, what have you. And so what came after that is what we call unified commerce from our perspective. It is thinking from a customer's perspective and building all the pieces of the software that are interconnected in real time, and you get 360-degree view of the customer and the business. So it's no longer brute force integration, and that's where the unified commerce platform, the evolution of SaaS. So while SaaS was being delivered throughout, but the SaaS has changed dramatically, at least for us. And what customers are looking for is something that's comprehensive, that's agile, and that's customizable, because every business wants to operate differently, whether you sell them packaged software or you sell them SaaS. Just one more slide about the evolution of SaaS in e-commerce space. And what's really interesting is the data on the right-hand side that's actually coming from Forrester Research, very recent data. And the red bars, if you can read careful from far, is basically showing the distribution of SaaS revenue in technology for e-commerce platform compared to the licensed. So the light gray bar at the top is the licensed revenue, and the red bar at the bottom is the SaaS subscription. And SaaS subscription is expected to double between now and 2019, whereas you'll see that the license revenue, the gray bar, which is mostly the product like IBM WebSphere in my space, IBM or Oracle would go out and sell, even though they're making strides now to the cloud side. That will peak in 2017 and start actually going down when the industry itself is growing at 16-17% per year. So that's kind of the tipping point, if you will. The pinnacle of licensed software, at least in my space in e-commerce, is 2017. And after that, there's going to be a gradual decline and continuous growth of the SaaS vendors. And on the left-hand side, what we see is what are some of the factors that are driving this movement towards SaaS. It's not just the clever buzzword that everybody is looking for and everybody loves SaaS, but there are some real business benefits why customers are gravitating towards SaaS. One, they want agility and innovation. They don't want a software that stays stagnant forever, meaning the responsibility of innovation should no longer be with the customer, because once they've customized your packaged software, they cannot get free upgrades and they lock themselves in, and the world is moving so fast. I mean, even in retail, very soon you're going to be seeing things like virtual reality, augmented reality, and while the software may have a 3-5 year term, most retailers cannot afford to wait 3-5 years before they bring these innovations to the customer. Otherwise, they'll be dead. So what they want is the ability to scale quickly. That's the other tenet of SaaS is, most retailers actually get about 70 to 80% of the annual revenue in the time frame from the week of Thanksgiving going up to December 24. That can constitute anywhere between 60 to 90% of all revenue. That's 4 to 6 week period. So if you weren't using SaaS, then you would have the responsibility of scaling your software, your data center, your infrastructure, your security, all of those things. And that's one big advantage with SaaS. A true SaaS provider will provision resources on demand so you can scale without compromising performance or security. A global customer reach. You want to try something small in Latin America, and we deal with customers all the time. You deal with enterprise customers that bought a very expensive license of a large enterprise application, but this new market is too small to marshal all of those resources to go after, just to dip your toe in the water. And therefore, global expansion, geographical expansion is very well suited where you don't have to deploy security and infrastructure and footprint, but that's another big advantage. And then omni-channel, this is happening not just in retail, but channels are converging just about everywhere. And then you have to have one application talk to another application when they are residing inside a firewall. The responsibility of making those open and available now falls with your IT department, and which are overloaded as they are. So marketers want to get quick win, quick access, and we cannot put the marketers behind IT, which can be a challenge. And as I stated earlier, that just because you're delivering software on the internet does not make you a SaaS company by any stretch of the imagination. So the key metrics, the three things that keep me up at night as a founder, as an CEO of a SaaS company, and those three things are CMRR, which stands for Contracted Monthly Recurring Revenue. So it's, in simple words, it's recurring revenue. Number two is churn, is how many customers are deactivating their account and how many are no longer using. And that can be different to different products, because if you have a freemium model, that churn would be slightly different. Obviously, I'm talking here about live customers, live paying customers that are churning. And if you have any questions, since we have time, please feel free to interject. And cash flow, because the rule with SaaS business is you might be signing up a lot of deals, a lot of accounts, but it can actually lead to cash flow problem, which can actually bring a company down even when the company is growing like gangbusters. That's very counterintuitive to most traditional packaged software business, where when you sell a license, you get a big chunk of money up front, whereas when I sell a large SaaS deal, I'm only getting a monthly revenue and maybe some services, but I have the obligation of delivering those services, so I got to ramp up, which means I might see a cash flow squeeze, even though I'm growing, and my bookings are much longer.
Manish, when you went to the SaaS model, because you made a conversion at some point in time from a package license, a software licensing company to a SaaS model, how did your investors take that change on your income statement, right? Because it was a pretty significant change in what they used to see versus what they were seeing now from a cash flow and income point of view.
That's a great question. So we made the transition from a services company to SaaS, but this is a very important question because we also did a project with Cohn Reznick, and Gorgana was part of it. That's how I got to meet her when they did a project for us to recast our financial accounting principles into SaaS compliant, or GAAP compliant principles. And one of the biggest lessons we learned was people often confuse bookings versus revenue earned. And I think probably that's where you're headed with that, is just because somebody paid you 12 months of fees in advance doesn't necessarily mean that can be reflected on your income statement, because you can only recognize there's a whole host of issues around revenue recognition, which I think Paul and you can talk a lot more in a more educated manner. But I think that was a big opener for us, because your revenue can be highly misleading if you're just looking at QuickBooks, especially when you're going to go raise capital.
Yeah, and Paul, when you looked at that, how do you couch that for investors?
Well,
That's a great question. So before I answer that, let me introduce myself. I'm with our advisory practice within Cohn Reznick, where my colleague is with on the accounting side. But I worked with a lot of SaaS organizations, and I got into the business in 2001 with a small company in San Francisco on Market Street that had 30 employees. The name of the company was Salesforce.com. And they became one of the founders of SaaS. And if you look at some other companies related, like the Amazons of the world and these SaaS-based business models, there's different metrics and KPIs associated, typically around customer engagement and customer growth, in addition to churn and cash flow and CMMR as well too. So what I saw and experienced was this concept called net future earnings potential. So whereas Wall Street investors demand almost like a quarterly return, it's a little bit more of a pragmatic type of approach that benefits companies like Manish's company to build a real business, add customizations and features, and be in it for the long haul. So those are a couple of my thoughts.
Right, so in short, you gave Manish some ideas about how to couch this to investors and make them not focus all the time on CMRR, churn, and cash flow. There was more to it than that, is that?
Yeah, so concepts like customer lifetime value, customer retention, average order value, share of wallet. So Manish probably has at least a half a dozen to a dozen modules or key components of functionality. Next year, he'll probably have 50% more functionality as he rolls out waves of innovation and functionality, which then the customer actually pays a little bit more for potentially as well. So it's kind of balancing the features and the innovation gets paid for over time, and you want to retain that customer and keep that customer base. But from a SaaS perspective, the companies benefit more from increased subscription fees typically.
All right, so Manish, Paul stole your second. Paul, all right.
The other points I think Paul touched on a little bit, which is CAC, which is Customer Acquisition Cost, CAC. And if you ever go on Shark Tank, that's the first question they're going to ask. So that's, it's harder to calculate than one might imagine, and I think if you want to be more sophisticated, you probably want to calculate your CAC by different advertising channels or any form of customer acquisition. So you know that some channels may be more efficient than others. However, that doesn't mean you should not use other channels. So for example, branding. It's really hard to calculate your cost of customer acquisition through money that you're going to spend on branding, but kind of spills over into other areas. And customer lifetime value, which is one of the basically one of the metrics that demonstrate the what kind of long-term value creation are you putting out. So is your product, customers use it? Is it like something that maybe it's a wedding planning service? They'll only use it for X number of months. Once that event is over, you're done. So, or there's a product like GoEcart that once you get into the enterprise, it's almost very, very difficult to uproot that because all members of our client's organization are using it, from customer service people all the way to the inventory planners, and it takes a lot of training. So you want your CLTV to be very high, and you want your customer acquisition cost to be very low. And if you basically divide your monthly revenue by churn, you'll technically get the customer lifetime value. So if you have low churn and you have a high subscription fee, you'll have a pretty large customer lifetime value. And then one of the other rules of SaaS is tune before you scale. We as entrepreneurs are always highly optimistic. You get this one lead from Lithuania, and then you drop everything because you want to go close this guy who wants the software in Russian or whatever that thing is, because it's what makes us entrepreneurs, because we are highly optimistic. But then all of a sudden, maybe even more, it could be a very large brand. I mean, we get inquiries from large brands like DHL Africa, but we have to stay disciplined and say no, because we don't have customer service people in that time zone. We don't have local language speaking reps, and it looks more opportunistic. So, we want to just focus on where our market is. The number 4 rule is around sales, which is separate your hunters and farmers and pay them all on CMRR growth. So at GoEcart, at our company, we have a clear distinction between hunters and farmers. Hunters are salespeople that bring in new accounts, new logos, and farmers are people that are cultivating that account, that are account managers, and we make a huge distinction, because the personality trait even of the people that are relationship-based are not the ones that are just going to be as effective in hunting new deals. They just have very different personalities. And we want to pay them on CMRR growth. So the way how our comp plan is designed for salespeople is, there's 2 portions of it. One is they have a CMRR quota. So let's just say $10,000 of CMRR quota per quarter, and they may have $50,000 of services. So services percentage on the commission will be flat. Even if you sold $200,000 of services, you blew past your quota, we will not over-reward you. We will not. However, if you went and sold $20,000 of CMRR, you will not get commissioned at 150% as opposed to 100%, because we're trying to reward the behavior that we want the business to see. And we're all about CMRR. So the simple thing to do would be, if you combine everything, all the revenue, and play them up a flat percentage, that can be highly destructive in some ways, because now you don't have annuity, but you got this big project that you need to scale up for, and you paid a ton of money to your salesperson to sell something that you really did not intend or want to sell. So this is moving further down. Traditional IT channels don't work as well for SaaS. Savvy online marketing. So anyone if you're a SaaS product company, online marketing has got to be a core competency. It's not something that you can outsource, not in my opinion. That is just as important as your product, and it's important that you are very clever at the latest online marketing, because all your customers live on the internet. It's very important. We talked about staying local. The temptation to move and follow the lead can be difficult to resist, but I would highly recommend that. And then having one version of the code in production. This is something that you will encounter as soon as you have your customer number 2. The customer number 2 wants the software to be customized, because their business is different than the customer number 1. And that is, learning to say no to customization is perhaps one of the core competencies you'll need to develop if you don't have already. And the way to do it is through lots of configurations, and we'll talk about that shortly. And the important part of SaaS is the service, because this, at least in my space, is a very competitive market. There's a lot of competitors. So, service, not just, there's a concept, I call it customer focused versus customer driven. And there's a big distinction between the two. Customer focused means you are thinking about the better for the customer, thinking about their success, as opposed to customer driven, which is if the customer tells you do this, you will do that without asking twice. And we believe if the customer is successful on your platform, they're more likely to stay with you than they're failing and they love you. So I think that's very important. And then we talked about some and capital that's needed. It's getting harder for products in established markets that you have to do R&D and you have to sell. Obviously, all those costs are front-loaded, which can take up to 4 years of runway before you see any cash flow positive. So that's a metric to be aware of. And I'll just breeze through this because I think we spent quite a bit of time. If you're thinking about going into SaaS, what are some of the things you should think about? Make sure you choose a large market because there's a lot of competition, and the real benefit of SaaS, the pricing will come down. So unless you have, SaaS is all about volume, generally speaking. You can't really do a very large SaaS business, whether you look at Salesforce.com or you look at HubSpot. It's about volume, bring that total cost of ownership down and recover your fixed costs. So large market always helps. Create a hub on the web. What that means is that your online presence is super duper important. You know, you can build the best website for somebody else, but if your website doesn't look just as slick, you're probably not going to be able to convince them. And number two, just make sure all those links keep coming back to you as a source of reference back to you. So accelerating organic growth. This is all through SEO, clever marketing tactics. That's one of the big things you can do with a SaaS product. Because according to Google B2B research, 69% of the sales cycle takes place before a customer ever speaks to a rep. That's 70% of your sales cycle is happening without a human being ever talking to the customer. So what's talking with the customer is your case studies, your presentation, your website copy, your forms, your nurture campaigns, all of those. And create a compelling story. Go to a number of sites, number of products, I don't even know what they do. And that's really hard. If the customer cannot get it within the first 5 minutes of, or I should say first 5 seconds of landing on your website. So employ something very clever, simple, like a lot of people are doing this 45 to 90 second quick videos that give you very quickly the problem that you're trying to solve if the customer can relate to that. So creating a compelling story, building the business into the product. What that means is if your product is low priced, you want to put all the self-service tools as part of the product. So they shouldn't have to call a rep to add this module if that module is $10 a month. Because if you're going to get a rep involved, you're probably only delaying your profitability because it's going to cost you significantly more. So all of those hooks built into the product. Enable mass customization. What that means is enable mass configuration. Because customer number two's presence is going to be different than number one, but if you allow them to configure the product, assuming that all the other parts of the product work well with that configuration. So somebody wants to display 10 products on the page, they can change that number to 10. Somebody else wants to display 20. In our software, they can change it to 20. They don't have to call anyone. That's the example, a very simple example of configuration. API. The world is becoming more and more open. No matter what software you're going to develop, there'll be need for more software, competing, complementary products that if you're not supporting a highly scalable, open standards API, honestly, you can't build a software today in 2016 without it. In fact, API should be built before the product even ships. And engage your community. This is, some people will argue people can copy your product because, you can copy someone's product. You can look at it, you can easily get intel. They can copy your strategy, they can copy your marketing tactics. What's really hard to copy sometimes is the community. And the community that is part of the product, the best practices that share, the relationships, and building a strong community can be one of your moats that you build around your castle. Hard to do, but important. the components of SaaS, CMRR components. So you can increase your CMRR by adding new accounts. That's pretty simple. You can increase your CMRR by increasing your price, because there's a lot of wisdom around, how do you, if you start in the SMB, can you scale up and increase your pricing as your product get feature rich, and do you have pricing power? And on the converse, if you're competing in a very competitive space like ours, there's a lot of pricing pressure that will try to drive some pricing down as well. And the churn rate. So if you're losing more customers than you're gaining, so your churn rate is high, or you're losing them too fast, that will also affect your CMRR. And then cross-sell and upsell. So, it depends on how much other desirable features, functionalities you have in your product that compels you to move from, the first rung to the next. And that can have a significant impact if you have something like a land and expand strategy. And those are things that you need to think really hard, because if you just mistime or miscalculate either one, you can hurt yourself. Because if you price your product too high, then your new accounts will suffer. If you give them everything they could possibly buy, then there's not much room for cross-sell and upsell. And if the pricing, if the customer feels the pricing is questionable, then that will also have impact on referenceability and customer success metrics that you would need at the time of renewal to convince this customer to stay on.
And Paul, why don't we ask you to comment on what you've heard, and let me introduce, first of all, Paul Goldman. Did I pronounce that correctly?
Perfect, yeah.
Managing director at Cohn Reznick's Advisory Services. And Paul, why don't you just tell us a little bit about what Cohn Reznick Advisory does for these kinds of companies, and then talk about what you've heard and some feedback. I know you guys have been together for a while.
Sure. We help middle market, high growth companies with new digital business models, reimagining the customer experience around mobility and new digital technologies, operationalizing or doing process digitization to reduce cost or take cost out of the business. And we do a lot with big data analytics, visualization of data to drive primarily revenue growth, customer acquisition, and customer recapture for our clients. And first of all, Manish, excellent presentation, and it's an outstanding product in SaaS. A couple of quick thoughts, and I'm typically the guy who's selecting and implementing for clients. And one thing about SaaS that my clients really get the value out is the concept of configuration versus customization. It is so fast, and the things that we can do now within 30 days, 5 to 10 years ago would take 3 to 6 months.
And how many $1 million, Paul?
It's incredible.
Oh, just the consulting fees, right?
And that's kind of where our point of view is that customers and clients, the market, okay, there's no such thing as a 5-year strategy. Strategies are 5 months now related to this great revolution called, digital or 4.0 related to that. And companies have to reassess what, markets and customers are doing in 5-year types of periods. And they have to tweak or adjust their software and their platforms, whether it's marketing management, mobility, content management, e-commerce, CRM, in 30, 60, and 90-day increments. Similar to the way Facebook or a big player provides a new release of their software almost every week, as you would. So customization, the code base, it's more like a tenant model where the data model, the basic and the standards stay in play. But what's good about a company like Manish's, is that it's highly configurable. So I could still be personalized in how I engage with my customer, but be in the same, it's a highway that has guardrails, traffic lights, and a double line for when you can pass and when you cannot pass. But you can decide what car you want to drive on it, how fast you want to drive it, and where you want to drive it to on that side. So that's the biggest thing with SaaS. A couple things related to e-commerce platforms in general is it used to be, and Manish had a great picture of omnichannel, where e-commerce was website, a shopping cart, and a catalog. And it was all about conversion, right? Quick, place the order, and hopefully nothing goes wrong, nothing crashes, the order goes out, and there's no returns. What we're seeing in the marketplace now is that e-commerce is becoming more not only transactions and conversions, but companies are using it to extend their brand and build a brand relationship or a product relationship with their companies. So the platforms incorporate powerful analytics, powerful components such as video or new ways of leveraging content in the sales process, or new ways of lead capture, or capturing the lead and doing something like a video chat or a sell. We were working with a client this morning where it's a retail client. As they're on a website, they would be able to text their friend on a mobile device and bring in a personal shopper from that particular company and do a three-way conversation as to, picking bridesmaids gowns for a particular retailer with 6 different people across the country in one session related to that. And that's not crazy. Customers, especially the millennial buyer, they're demanding that. They demand a unique customer experience. They demand multi-platform, not only online, but it's all mobile. They expect e-commerce companies to personalize their offering. They expect e-commerce and retail consumer product plays to capture their data and provide relevant offers in a safe and secure environment. It's high stakes. So with SaaS, it gives you the opportunity and the ability to change and keep continuously innovating, not just your applications, but your business processes, as well as your business model in general as well, too. I think that's some of the larger value drivers of SaaS.
Oh, that was great. I want to go back to some of the transitional issues, right? Because we still are at a transitional time. There's still many and Paul and I work with a lot of the same clients doing the same thing. I represent the clients on the legal side, but it also involves vetting the vendors and looking at all kinds of things. And so we see a lot of transitions, right, from this data package and services type arrangement that we had in the past to the SaaS environment. And the clients are all concerned about a lot of different things. So let's run through some of those. And Manish, we're going to challenge you a little bit, right, as we go through. Let's start with data, right, and data security. Is that top of mind for your clients? And how do you give them comfort? Because it used to be they had the data in their own data center. Now they have data in your data center, and they don't have visibility of that data center.
Right, so we service retailers, merchants that accept credit cards. So data security is probably one of the top concerns our clients have. I'm sure you've all heard of the breaches at Target and Home Depot and everyone else. But also because we are the prime targets. If anyone wants to hack someone, they'd rather hack our system to get millions, tens of millions of credit cards than to, get some other quantitative data. So data security is absolutely top of mind. And actually, I would argue that that is one of the top reasons why a lot of our clients go to SaaS. especially the SMBs. The SMBs don't have the expertise in-house, they don't have the resources in-house to manage security, nowhere to the degree that we can manage. So we have to get third-party audit, like PCI. We have assessors that will actually test our systems and do a full audit to give us a certificate of pass or fail. And it happens on a monthly basis, quarterly basis, and that always keeps us on our toes, because the PCI Council will release new standards, and the auditors would pick up on those. So we have to constantly add those patches, otherwise you will not pass the audit. And if you don't pass the audit, that could even mean a breach of your agreement with your customer. So we feel that security is better handled. And there was one of the points that I was going to make later, which was around the concept of BYOD, which is bring your own device, which raises a whole host of other problems that creates a... So I would say, even for the large enterprise, when they buy software from a vendor, they are not fully well versed in all the security attributes of the product. Yes, it may be in-house, but the internet, by definition, your customers are going to access your product from the internet, so it will be accessible. So we get that more from our larger enterprise customers. Once they go through our process, they are very satisfied. But it's a huge risk for the SaaS vendor to take security absolutely paramount, because every time you push out code, you have a potential for disrupting that security, and it only needs, somebody just needs a tiny window. I mean, just last week we were getting attacks from, Eastern Europe, but we were able to work with our hosting partners to disrupt that. There's a really cool tool that we've started using. It's a partnership we developed with a company called Cloudflare. I'm not going to plug them, but I think it's a very cost-effective tool that allows you to do things like distributed denial of service attacks. It's very cost-effective, and it also speeds up the website through caching.
And Manish, to follow up on that, and this is probably a question for Paul too, are you using a standards-based security management program, protocols like ISO 27001 or anything like that? Do you get SOC 2 audits? And maybe Paul wants to respond to that a little bit, because he can talk about what these things are. I just write it down on a piece of paper and ask you to explain. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think security reputation is very hard to overcome if you get caught. So while we are all in the rush to push code out as fast as possible, that's one of the premise of SaaS. Amazon.com pushes out code every 7 seconds. So within their enterprise, they're pushing out new code every 7 seconds. Can you imagine? But especially for our vertical, if we are not 100% secure, that will be a huge damage to our reputation, very hard one to bounce back from.
Manish, I assume you must have some third-party partners that you integrate, with to complete your product. How does that work with the security model? Like, how does that work when you're rolling out updates to your customers? What I'm asking from a purely selfish standpoint is, what is the most important consideration that you have when you're evaluating a third-party vendor to include as part of your platform?
So we go through these conversations at the CIO level when we have a large enterprise deal. They'll want to know, they want to see our PCI certificate, latest, that it's valid. Who is it issued by? When did we pass that audit? In terms of the best practices around security, we monitor PCI standards, which is a governing body that issues mandates. And then every time we have a new version of the code, we would first release it on only one instance, and we would isolate that instance, so we're not actually updating the production. Amazon that we started using has their routine windows. I think it's, I don't know which day, Thursday mornings is when they do roll out the patches for operating systems and things like that. As far as choosing the vendors, we look for, good branded vendors that our customers would understand, because part of it is we are selling them the comfort, and if it's a name they recognize, if I tell them, hey, it's a Cisco ASA firewall, I think fewer questions being followed up on as opposed to some ABC company that they've not heard of. But more importantly, I think it's when they talk to our existing customers who've been there for a long time, there's no public record, because such information, if violated, very soon does become public. So there's a lot of services on Amazon. The good thing with Amazon Cloud infrastructure is there's a lot of services that you can buy on a subscription basis, like intrusion detection services, even virus scan is a monthly subscription. And then there's a lot of consulting partners on the Amazon network, because Amazon is really trying to position itself as a leader in the space. So they have partnered up with a lot of consulting firms that are making Amazon infrastructure available to SMBs at a very reduced cost, because Amazon is subsidizing that. So I'm happy to give you some names that they're also in charge of monitoring through a command center to, if there's anything wary that you're looking at. So security is a really, really big deal, especially if you're storing personal information like credit card and so on.
Suzanne, Manish talked about data security and selling data security to his customers by linking himself to key names in the industry, Cisco or AWS, right? I mean, it's a way to sell. How does your company sell the same thing, the data security issue?
We have a very simple and complete solution for that, in that we do not host our application. It is downloaded onto our clients' web servers, whether that be in the cloud or on-site at their bigger clients, and therefore our application sits behind their firewalls with their data. We never touch their data, it's never passed to us. So it's pretty simple.
And so a very different model, and I thought actually the distinction between what you were doing and what Manish has to do is important. Manish could probably never implement the model where the customer holds all the data. I don't think it would work.
Yep, and I'll comment on one more layer of security in addition to into a couple of trends. I'm not a cybersecurity guy, but two things that we see happening is the credit card transaction. People aren't keeping the credit card number. Less and less people are not keeping the credit card number on file. It's the last 4 digits related to that, and they have to go through an experience of adding that credit card. But on top of the transaction is a new component or new module called customer identity and access management. So it allows another level of protecting, we call the digital customer profile. The name, the address, the preferences, the permissions, the insights related to that particular customer. It's OAuth 2.0 type of compliant. There's token-based access across web properties around the front end of the customer experience. So if you go into and look at companies like Giga or Jamrain or Inbound ID, traditionally companies have built these registration and validation and identity access management services by themselves on the website. They're buying this as a service now, incorporating that, and it brings in another level of protection on the front end, in addition to the security and access services that Manish would have within his platform on the back end, on the commerce engine.
Thank you. Manish, why don't we turn to a different topic, and I'm going to point to the bottom bullet on this slide. The SAS requires investment capital to fund 4+ years of runway. So how did you approach investors? And I know Bessemer is one of your investors, because you can tell, or I think Bessemer is one of
They're not an investor, but we admire them.
Yes, okay, you admire them. You'd like them to be an investor someday, is that what you're saying? Anybody here with your connections?
I think they're definitely one of the leading edge in SaaS.
So, if you're willing to just talk a little bit about your capital structure and how you brought in investors, because I know a lot of folks in the audience are interested in that as they begin to think about how to pivot some of their businesses.
So we are a bootstrap company, so we grew the business from the ground up. But I can share the pros and cons of perhaps my experience. We made the transition from being a services company to a product company. So it took us 4+ years actually to make that transition from a services business to product, where we were taking the income from the services and rapidly reinvesting in the product. And the challenge with that is you have an identity problem. You know, are you a services company that wants to do product, or are you a product company that is stuck doing services? It's a very classic mistake that I see a lot of companies make. And what happens, the reality is, services business is very cyclical. So suddenly you get a new project, every project comes with a deadline. So now you have to almost freeze your product development and allocate all your resources to engineers to deliver the project, which means now your product roadmap is out the window. And likewise, when services is down, you're trying to double up on the product side. So we depends on the market that you're going after. If they're already, we were lucky that when we entered the space, there was very few turnkey shopping carts, but the explosion of other products came into the market very rapidly, and it became really hard to differentiate yourself. So if you're a product-focused founder, your strength is in the engineering and the software. So, but to scale in SaaS, either you have an absolutely phenomenal product that can sell without a sales rep, or you better learn the sales and marketing, how to scale it. And so the 4 years come from that. If you're building a world-class, high-growth SaaS product company, from R&D to shipping your first product, to building a sales organization, training them, getting your marketing machinery going, and closing that sale, and then adding enough sales that you're cash flow positive. That means the amount of recurring revenue you're bringing in minus your fixed operating expenses, or at least at a break even.
So Paul, Manish has given us some great pointers on things that we should think about. When you look back at your experience with SaaS companies, either as they made the transition from a traditional services company to a SaaS company, or as they started up a brand new SaaS company, what's the biggest mistake you see being made and most common mistake, and how do we avoid it?
It's the percentage of marketing and sales dollars. So I've seen companies go north of 60% of their revenues go right back into marketing and sales, and it's not enough allocation back to the R&D pipeline. And it's the chicken and egg type of theory, but it's managing, the best companies manage it like an investment portfolio. And you have to could constantly shift and manage that and balance that particular act. And I've seen some companies really have a great product, but they've gotten too aggressive with their sales and marketing budget and actually never recovered after the first big hit and spike within their product portfolio.
And Suzanne, let me target the same kind of question to you, but from a product marketing point of view. What's sort of the biggest mistake you see with SaaS companies as they try to market and engage their customers?
Well, a favorite quote of mine is, no one was ever mystified into buying anything. I think our
I've seen some
approach.
great websites that
Yeah.
minimize that,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah, exactly. And another favorite one from an old ad guy in the 50s is, don't tell me about your grass seed, tell me about my lawn. But that's just a personal favorite of mine. I think we are more and more, as you mentioned, Manish, it's a very crowded market, no matter what SaaS you are, unless it's something that's just being invented this very minute. And it's really difficult to break through the noise. And I think the biggest mistake is not being very clear and loud and proud about what exactly makes you different. Especially, for example, in BI, everybody has charts and graphs, everybody has dashboards. The poor consumer, I feel compassion for the customer out there looking at all these websites, trying to figure out what makes one different from the rest. So we are now taking the approach of drilling a hole 1 inch wide and 10 miles deep with our marketing. We don't veer, we don't confuse. I think that's the biggest mistake, is not being clear about who you are and conveying it.
And Manish, if I could ask you, you've heard some of the things that are mistakes. None of us are perfect. You said we didn't live in Nirvana, right? Single instance, great idea. Let's see you do it. But as you did that conversion, did you, are there mistakes that you look back on and say, boy, we did that wrong, and if I were advising somebody who's starting up today, I tell you, don't do X.
Yeah, quite a few actually.
All right, we have another hour.
Just looking back, I think something that Paul alluded to, everybody has the beginner's luck, right? You put a product into the market, you will get some customers, but not knowing whether they are your ideal customers or they were just customers, and then customers, the minute you have 2 paying customers, if you're not so lucky, they'll be taking you in 2 divergent directions, and when you have, say, 50 or 100, now you're spinning in all directions. So I think there's that, and as a bootstrap company, we were too focused on trying to please the customer, and we built many things that we should not have built. I think the temptation to satisfy everyone for the SaaS product can lead to almost like a Swiss Army knife that doesn't do one thing really well, does many things mediocre. And I think just taking the survey, continuously re-examining your product portfolio, your customers, and where the market is headed, and building the feature set that the market is going to appreciate, as opposed to perhaps doing catch-up or me too. It's never always the product that has the most number of features. That's a collective set of features of all your competitors will ever win. I think it's about finding that niche and going double down on the few areas, and then find the customers that want your product, as opposed to selling them a product that exists. In fact, there's a new school of marketing concept is, when we have the traditional marketing is about, you have a wide funnel, and then people will go down the funnel, and there comes out your marketing ready, your sales ready leads. There's a new concept they call it flip the funnel. And so basically, I'll just find my ideal customers, and let's find other customers that are like my ideal customers, as opposed to casting a very wide net. So the other mistakes, I think, perhaps not investing enough in sales and marketing, or we did a lot of trade shows, a lot of branding campaigns that didn't quite work for us, where we should have perhaps done more guerrilla marketing. We should have done more other forms of marketing. So having a proper channel mix, and you're measuring your return based on each channel, as opposed to just trying to compete with the bigger competitors on their turf, is going to be very, very hard. you probably need something more growth hacking skills, like a little bit. We should have done more partnerships and ecosystem and strategic alliances. When you're small, you have limited sales and marketing capacity, and if you can engage the channel early and get traction, now you have a full hundreds of people, probably thousands of the channel selling for you. So SaaS, even today, cannot exist by itself. You have to plug yourself into the ecosystem where you're easy to find, you're easy to work with, and so we have had to adopt a very co-opetition-like strategy where we would actually partner and compete with some of our partners at the same time. So because we have a suite product that does what they do, but it does many other things. So we've integrated with them and said, hey, if you're not ready to make the full switch, we'll provide the second half of the solution. If you're ready, we can take over the whole thing. So it's sort of you're forced to play in an ecosystem nice with other providers.
You made an interesting distinction earlier, and you said, well, we focused on servicing the customer and doing what the customer wanted because we were bootstrapped. Do you sometimes, and one, you might explain just in case the audience doesn't know what you mean by being bootstrapped, and then do you sometimes wish that you had gone out for funding in a different way or funded the operation differently?
Yeah, I think bootstrapped, we did not raise any outside capital. There was no outside investment. So we were simply reinvesting whatever profits we made back into the business. And in looking back in retrospect, yes, that was not a great idea. The reason for that is we were competing. We had a really good product, a great vision, we still do. But the market just exploded from 2006 onwards. And those very same products that we competed with are today multi-billion-dollar companies on Wall Street. They are publicly traded, and we were competing neck to neck. So not having that much access to capital allows you to think long-term, allows you to build a team, allows you to scale without thinking about how to write the next paycheck or how you're going to fund the next payroll. And especially in SaaS, you have to take a longer-term view because your competitors are not, they're not sleeping. They're working under the desk just as hard as you are. And if you're thinking any differently, you're fooling yourself. I mean, if you think that, oh, just after this release, I will have this magic product, believe you me, they have something else coming at the same quarter that you don't know about.
So, we've heard some excellent points and pointers, I think, from all of the panelists. I want to open it up to the audience for questions, because I'm sure some of you have questions. First of all, you're all to be complimented for being in here. As I was driving over, I was thinking to myself, oh, this is exactly the kind of day we don't want. Right? It's warm out, it's beautiful, but you all were patient, so we're going to let you ask lots of questions. So I saw a hand. Let me start with the gentleman, and if you could just say your name, where you're from.
And from Hartford, and software developer.
Okay.
IT person. So I have a question about the idea of being bootstrapped. Where, in terms of your product design within your domain, how did you source your ideas for capabilities and functionality? Did some of that come from customers, and does that still happen today? Like when you're trying to say, we need to either, and even decisions to add on a domain. So it's all about e-commerce, but then if you're adding on more analytics as another value add-on for your customers, because they're demanding that. How do you go through that whole decision cycle?
Well, I can speak for us. Paul has a more varied experience dealing with multiple clients. For us, I think we start by studying the competitors, and I mean study, not just hear or blindly see. I think it's the job of the product manager to deeply understand the customer and in fact even look at the product, look at the demo, or sometimes ask the customer if they're already using that product, what do they like? Like, so we are in the process of improving our warehousing capabilities, for example. So adding mobility functionality to warehousing. So we would ask our customers, hey, what other products do you like and why? Tell me very, very specifically what do you like in those products, and then, you know, many times we would partner if that's a function that we don't wish to go into, because we may not be quite ready to provide the same deep level of functionality that may be used by 5% of our user base, so it probably doesn't make sense for us to build it. But if many times we'll discover that it's really a matter of education, we probably have the functionality, customer just doesn't know how to use it, or they call it differently. I think the minimal viable product principle, we apply that all the time. So before we go too deep into building something, we will, you know, we'll always look for catalyst. You know, this is already on our roadmap, but you know, if some merchant comes through, we know they're going to actually use it, so we're going to get some real-time feedback from that functionality as opposed to building it alone. But I think, and then reading latest research on, you know, you can do something very simple, or you can go more complex like Gartner. Gartner has these, they call it peaks of maturity and enlightenment model, which technologies are nascent, which are growing in popularity, which have reached their peak and others are declining. So they get a larger universal sentiment that, are you investing in technology that is yet to reach its peak, or are they on their way out? So those are some multiple, there's no one place where we look for. We subscribe to the pragmatic marketing's concept of product management, which is don't try to just copy the customer, don't try to build what salespeople are selling, not all of it, or but look at the market, where's the market going, and take all these other factors into consideration before you decide. Because building features is very hard, very time consuming, very expensive. You should spend twice as much time researching it, half the time building it.
And Suzanne, your company has the same kinds of issues. Where do you get your ideas as you decide to build, you know, additional functionality, new domains?
We all go into a conference room and slug it out. Right? Well, we also subscribe to the Pragmatic Marketing School of Product Management. So I really am fond of the Pragmatic Marketing, saying that most of the answers we need are not inside the building. So research, research, research. We have a very active client advisory board as well. So we don't ask our client advisory board to tell us what to put in. There's no obligation for us to include any features that they want, but it's a really, really good, solid source of understanding exactly how our product is being used, what the sticking points are, what's not working. And I also religiously attend all of the competitors' demos and try to see around the corner with what they're putting in their products. But I wanted to ask you, Manish, about this specific topic. Do you have a traditional product management role in your company? I wonder, as a technical CEO, founder, if that's something you can't keep your hands out of.
Well, I mean, I act as the product manager. It's been very hard to replace that, because it's just the domain expertise is a bit challenging, and we're still relatively small. But I think that no matter how small you are, and we are small, we were smaller, knowing that we'll put together an org chart and we'll give them the functional responsibilities, and we'll tell the person that right now you're wearing the product manager hat, you're not the CEO, you know. So just internally, this way, when we grow, we can easily transition them into their functional role, so they're not confused. Is it me, Joe, who's in charge, or is it Joe, the product manager, that was part of that? So I think having that distinction is very important so the developers don't feel that they have to make all the decisions or support is not driving the decision into the product because technical support can weigh in very heavily because they are the advocates of the customer. So we are always telling them to fight for the customer because we want that sort of nice push and pull between departments because if they're not going to be the advocate for the customer, whereas the engineering team is the advocate for the product, so collectively we get the best product.
Other questions? Hal, why don't you introduce yourself first?
Sure. What percentage of people who go SAS actually become sassy like you? And what's the secret of your success?
Well, I think there's also some research, and Paul, I'm sure you have a lot of data. I think they say that once you get past about, say, 2 million in ARR, which is the annual recurring revenue, that's probably a time where you can demonstrate that you are a pretty sustainable SaaS player. That 2 to 10 million is sort of the long road to profitability, the big drought, because once you've gone past 10 million ARR, you are a pretty solid SaaS business. I mean, the multiples are varying. I mean, they've come down significantly since late last year, but the SaaS business would get valued still at anywhere from 3 to 6, 7x of CMRR revenue. So I think 2 million, 1 million, you've proven the product of recurring revenue. 2 million, you're now on your way to scale, and 10 million is now you're a SaaS player to be reckoned with.
And I just look at the marketplace and just take a step back and look at cloud in general. That's where the market's going. It's the next generation of what customers want to buy, and where companies are actually, the leaders are actually already there, and then the late adopters are playing catch up right now. Is kind of what I see in the marketplace.
Other questions? I know I kept skipping over you.
That's all right.
And if you could again introduce yourself.
Yeah, sure. My name is Mark Salinger. I'm also with Exago. And a question for you, Manish. You mentioned Gartner. So have you guys contracted with Gartner? Are you a Gartner client or a Forrester client? Was that worth the money, the investment?
We're not a Gartner or Forrester client yet, but I think we run into them very frequently, especially at where we are at our stage of our business. When you're competing for the large enterprise business, I think being on the Gartner list or Forrester list is a huge advantage. And I think more than the research you're going to get, if for a lot of large IT company, or for a lot of large companies, somebody who is making the purchase has a job, and they need to defend their job, which is, as much as they want to do the right thing, but it's hard to, debate that, hey, you picked up your top 5 shortlist candidates all from the Gartner's Magic Quadrant. It makes, and there's a level of rigor. I don't want to sound that, it's just a namesake. I think, basically they will make you, they'll review the product and they will go through the process. So I think if you can afford it, I think it's totally worth it, as long as you can keep engaged with the analysts. And analysts are very, very active in our space, so I think it's a worthwhile investment.
So the Gartner rep was here as...
The check comes floating through.
Just one additional thought. There's actually crowdsourcing type of applications like G2 out there in the marketplace that I think might be a more, what's the right terminology? You got to be careful here. more of a, based on your features and functions and benefits, your unique value proposition of the product versus, you know, sometimes Gartner is a little, in my opinion, pay to play, if you would, related to them. And I founded a startup back in 2000, and it was actually a metagroup play in Gartner, and it had access and how they actually do the Magic Quadrant. I was very surprised on how that process worked and how.
Or maybe not.
I'm sure it's changed by now. I hope it's changed by now, but
Although Paul, you know, Manish made a terrific point, right? He said, well, you know, if you're the person within this large enterprise choosing a product, you know, nobody could fault you for, you know, having your 5 finalists be, you know, in the Magic Quadrant, right? And so there is some level of validation still at this point that the crowdsourcing of the intelligence is useful. But we all know the reality of this, and I think that may still be a reason for the pay to play, if that's really what it is. I'm going to take one last question. I think, did I see a question back here? Okay, one last question, and then we're going to wrap this up. Let our panelists take a drink and stick around for a little while.
We're going to have to combine my 2 questions into 2 parts. Sir, Brian Wiley from Guilford. I'm a CFO for hire business growth consultant, perpetually working on refining my tagline. Sorry. I'm going to ask 2 questions. One, you mentioned that you never took outside money, and
One last one.
I think you said never.
Yeah, that's right. We started. Yeah.
Never so far.
No, not so far.
Never in the first 16 years of your business. Up there, the first 2 bullets are some very commonly loved and respected and used external, often key metrics to let potential investors, institutional guys come in a board meeting every quarter and say, what about this, what about that? In other words, the use of those for an early stage company is not infrequently driven by outside parties, but you presumably use those as part of your day-to-day operations. What drove that sort of discipline? Those particular things you probably can find anywhere, but what drove the discipline not to, and plan, not to kind of run things as you saw fit on a day-to-day basis and use some much more structurable external so-called discipline operating criteria?
Right, I think that's a great question. Is there another one?
Sorry, that was part 1 of the question.
Well, I think whether you're investor-driven organization or self-bootstrapped, I think running smart business using the rules of the game, these are the rules that your larger competitors are playing with, and quickly recognize what those metrics are. And for us, I think the journey was more about how do I communicate this to my team. It wasn't so much that, you know, hey, I want to look really smart and make myself spreadsheet happy. You know, it was like, hey, how do I communicate this? And we have so many smart people in the organization. If I say it's Manish's idea, it's probably not going to stick. And if I say it's Bessemer, and it's what the biggest players, our biggest competitors are tracking, and that's the key to success, then I think the light bulb went on, and everyone recognized that, okay, now CMRR is our North Star metrics. In fact, you know, we look at other numbers, but when we talk internally, it's all about recurring revenue. From the person who answers our phone to the person who picks up the mail, everyone is aware that we are happy when that CMRR number goes up. We are sad when that number begins to slip. So that was sort of the reason, and these other metrics were really more offspring from there, because we always called it, you know, churn as the kiss of death for SaaS. Like simple lingo, simple words that stick. So those became the few mantra, and then we start tracking it, and we get a lot of free report. I think one of the advice I would say, sign up for all the you know, the VCs that are active in your space. Just sign up for the newsletter. They send you a ton of really good stuff free, you know, and they want to stay in touch with you. So that was the way how we went about doing it.
Can I ask part two quickly?
Sure.
To your point about VCs and outside investment, you did allude to that in part one. Just wondering briefly if you could walk us through your thought process and not taking, you mentioned that some of your competitors are now listed in various places. Was that something you seriously considered, or you always thought, well, bootstrap, we don't want outside money? Or did you go through a process of coming to that conclusion?
Right, so this was my first business out of college. So I founded Go-E-Cart in my dorm room, and a lot of it was probably ignorance. I did not know how to scale a business, and so we thought we could just solve this problem on our own. Didn't realize the extent of the problem in terms of that, sales and marketing leadership requires proven talent. You just can't solve it. You'll burn multiple cycles. Yes, eventually you'll solve it, but you've gone through 2 or 3 market cycles. And so looking back, maybe that was, we could have done things a bit differently. We could have gotten some additional scale very rapidly because our product was very, very competitive. Was that the question?
Yeah. Did you go through a conscious effort to raise outside money? It sounds like you should have.
Yeah, so we didn't make the process. I think that the lesson learned from there is that when the technology is in the evolution stages, when we were in 2004 or 5, the turnkey e-commerce software market was sort of just taking off. And if you have a really good product, that's the time. Once you've gotten a little bit of scale, a little bit of traction, that's the time to really raise money because everybody's optimistic. There's a saying, right? If you have no numbers, it only leads to imagination. If you have some numbers, a poor number, it only leads to worry as to why the numbers are so low. So if you have 0 revenue, it can only go up.
So I want to thank the panelists and Manish especially, since we put you in the hot seat. Manish, I work with a lot of startup companies and emerging growth companies. And the fact that Manish has so carefully focused on these types of metrics, right, that he looks to external validation and KPIs rather than making it up on his own. A lot of folks in Manish's position would say, hey, I'm brilliant, I know everything. And the only guy I know who really knew everything was Steve Jobs, right? He was always right. There aren't many Steve Jobs, although Manish, you may be close, right? So, the fact that he was so careful in thinking this through, if I were coming in as, say, outside counsel, helping somebody do an acquisition or merger discussion, all of these things would actually drive value of this company, right? Manish has talked about IP, right? That will drive value in the company. Manish talks about his people. That drives value in the company. So he seems to be, very focused. And the other thing that he said was a mistake I made early on was kind of letting the customers distract me from trying to serve those customers in all their different ways, distracted me at times from staying on the path to building the product I was supposed to build for my customers in mass rather than micro managing it for each individual customer. But he did get back on track, and Manish, we know you're going to be a great success staying here in Connecticut, creating new jobs. We love having you, and I want to thank you. I want to also thank our other panelists, and Paul, I know you're working with some of the companies out here, and Manish, and Suzanne, your company now has a chance to sell Manish on the opportunity to build in a BI module, right? Let's go, come on. You're on it, you talk over the bar. Everybody else, I'd like to invite you to Stay, go have a few more drinks. The lawn club would appreciate that. And hopefully our panelists can stick around at least for a little while before you're drawn out into the sun for a nice run or walk or whatever you'll do in the sun tonight. Thank you.